Hi, everyone. This is Mohanjit Jolly, co-founder and partner at Iron Pillar. Welcome to the show, the Big Picture podcast by Iron Pillar. And today, as my guest, I have my dear friend, my business school buddy, a technology executive, a serial entrepreneur, angel investor, LP, member of the Iron Pillar Network, Jonathan Flesher. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome.
I don't pay you enough for the promotion.
So look, you are one of the most fascinating people I have met over the years for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the fact I think you're the only person I know who has gone from being a philosopher to a banker to a media executive, in a remarkable sort of step function laden journey. So why don't you take me and take the audience through what your trajectory professionally has been, and then we'll dive deeper from there on.
I grew up in a steel town in Pennsylvania on an engineering school campus, Lehigh University, where my dad was a professor and a college chaplain. So I'm a son of a minister. I fled west to Pomona College, where I got my degree in philosophy, and being a child of the '80s, wanted to work on Wall Street. So I got a job in investment banking and spent 10 years as a banker, fit in business school at UCLA Anderson in there, and ended up at the end of the banking side going into venture capital and a hedge fund with KKR. After 15 years in finance, I said, I get paid a lot of money, but I don't want to be any of the people that I work for. I lost kind of my ability to model myself. I said, frankly, need to find something new. It was kind of like my first kind of, call it career change or midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it. And I said, what do I love? I love video games and I love animation. So I looked for some jobs at Disney and Pixar, and I really didn't want to do FP&A, but found a business development job at Electronic Arts. So that started my career in consumer content. So I went from EA to Zynga. I remember very clearly Bing Gordon bringing one of the founders of EA, bringing by this guy, Mark Pincus, looking to license all of our brands from EA. Me telling him, like, MySpace, who plays games on MySpace? Why would you ever spend any time on that? So I must have impressed him. He ended up recruiting me. So I ran business development at Zynga for 3.5 years. I went on, much to the chagrin of my father, to an online gambling startup. I spent time at a mobile messaging startup called Tango, in esports startup Skills. And then I got my chance to work in animation with the woman who ran the Farm Bills and the writer-director of the Madagascar movies. So spent a few years there and ended up with a few Emmy Awards, which is really odd for a business guy. And then was recruited into Discord, where I ran business development, partnerships, and corporate development. And then most recently, about getting close to 2 years now, into Reddit, where I do the same thing. I run business development, partnerships, and corporate development. So think of it as everything but ad sales and procurement.
That is absolutely amazing. I mean, talk about being at the cusp of multiple sort of tsunamis, if you will, in terms of social media, content creation, democratization. So what is it? I mean, I guess, what is it that gets you excited about business development in particular, right? And we'll get to how can, for example, entrepreneurs be thinking about business developments, and what are some of the do's and don'ts? But specifically, what is it that excites you about what you do?
So business development is a pretty broad term that people throw around, like private equity. Private equity means a lot of different things. So some people think of business development as sales. I personally don't define it that way. I think sales is sales and business development is a different thing. So by my definition, again, this is my definition, and I don't think it's necessarily universal. Business development is kind of really two things: the new and untested. So we're creating new markets. And for instance, at Zynga, I started the in-game advertising team within my team in business development, and got it up to 6 million a quarter before punted it out to the rest of the organization to stand alone. And I call that just generically, like, we figure out the widgets, like what's the market, who buys the widget, what does the widget look like, how do we price the widget? And when we get that business up and running, then you hand it over to a sales team. And it's a very different personality that I think runs those two different things. Sales is, hey, what's my funnel? Plenty of people are going to say no. I'm going to figure out, how to get a bunch of customers in the top of the funnel, how convert them over to, P1, P2, P3, like this sales funnel process. What's my drop off? How do I handle sales objections? All that kind of stuff. And it takes a different personality, just like people who are okay with having the door slammed in their face. Nope, that doesn't matter. I'm on to the next one. They like to run through walls, they grind through it, and they have something that's pretty well defined. Here's the product, here's what you're selling, here's why it matters to the end customer. The other side, that business development side, is much more nebulous, is like, well, could we build a business here? Maybe. Let's go out and talk to some people. Let's figure out what that is. We don't even know if there's a widget here. And then we have to figure out what that widget is and start to define it and do those things. And so to me, it's much more creative, much more entrepreneurial in my mind. And then the second part of this business development is what I call strategic business development, is what are the big deals? And they may be already widgetized, so to speak, but ones that are so big and complex that they move the needle for the company. And at my heart, you can tell from my finance background, I'm a deal guy. I like deals. I like kind of going out and doing them. I like making friends and, kind of negotiating through complicated things. That's very interesting to me. When it gets to be the sales widget that's incredibly well-fied, where it's like cookie cutter, I lose interest personally. I have run sales forces. I prefer to run business development teams. And that's kind of like more of a generic way of describing my view of how there is a difference between business development and sales.
Got it. So I was more in the latter camp when you're talking about strategic partnerships. That was sort of my mental model around BD, generally speaking. But I think the incubation part that you articulated, which is let's figure out a new business, and once we have sort of internal, not just minimum viable sort of product and product market fit, but there's some level of repetition and predictability. That's when you sort of have the on-ramp to the more general sort of sales engine within the enterprise. So that's
let me give you an example from my current employer.
Sure.
I don't want to give specifics around it, but I often say that I play a lawyer on TV, even though I don't have a JD. I read so many contracts from my finance career to my current business development career that I read contracts. And I encourage anybody who is doing a deal to read the entire contract. It's like when you sign up a lease for an apartment or buying a house, read it. Don't just glance over and hope that it looks right.
Yeah.
The second thing is I like to say I do product management on the weekend. So I, a little while ago identified something within my current employer where I wrote a product spec. It was terrible. And then I rewrote it and pitched it to our chief product officer and some of the product leads, and they're building it now. And so we're going out and we're pitching this and we're getting a lot of really good traction, but we're also in the process of doing that hand in hand with our ad sales team. And that's eventually going to become something that they sell. But the generation of it and kind of the ideation and market testing and things like that is something that we did in our group.
That's amazing. So you truly are dual brain, Jonathan. I think you have the creative side, the artistic, the
personality, I guess,
and the analytics. So you're just that's unbelievable. Okay, so taking that sort of BD definition, if you will, in the example you gave, towards talking about, let's say, you are also a prolific angel investor, right? So twofold question. One, let's start with, what gets you excited about putting money into companies, very early, of course, in their journey? Is there a specific thing that you look for? Is there a domain that gets some resonance from you? Or is it a combination of things that have to be checked before you write the check?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'd call myself prolific, because that definition's in the eye of the beholder. But let me tell you, for the ones that I do invest in, and I look at it as both ones that I actually write checks for versus as well where I spend kind of my excess time, because it's taking time away from my family, my time to just relax and do whatever I want on the side. That's an investment of itself as well for an advisory position. Couple things that I have as filters. One is I like to have domain expertise, and I think that's good because otherwise, if I'm putting cash into an investment, I don't really understand it. I shouldn't invest it. It's kind of like Warren Buffett saying, buy stocks of companies that you like and know, because otherwise you're going to have no idea. The second thing is when I do make an investment or I'm an advisor, I want to be able to help the company. If I don't have domain expertise, yes, I can talk in abstract things. It's really, I think, more impactful if I'm able to help, give my own point of view. I don't want to go be as egotistical as say the wisdom, but more of here's how I would view these things. Take it as you will, as an entrepreneur, that may or may not be appropriate for the situation. And you may decide to do something different than I might suggest. Third filter is the team, the people. A lot of the companies that I advise or invest in, I've worked with the people before. So I know them personally. Iron Pillar, I know you personally. I know and trust you, kind of deeply. And so that makes me happy to be a part of the Iron Pillar network because I understand the people that I'm working with and kind of know that they're the right people that when times are tough, they're gonna be pivoting in a good direction, all that kind of stuff that matters as an entrepreneur.
No, that's awesome. Thank you for saying that. By the way, the feeling is mutual indeed, and we appreciate you being part of the IPN, the Iron Pillar Network, and so do our entrepreneurs. Extending to, I guess, the BD do's and don'ts, right? Because that's your domain, and I'm sure over the years you may have made some mistakes and learned from them, and I'm sure you've seen others make mistakes as well. So is there a particular formulaic approach to business development? Are there, just low-hanging fruit, if you will, in terms of the do's and don'ts when it comes to BD?
So I have Jonathan's rules of negotiation. So I'll get to that in a second. I would like to say that it's super creative and there's it's bespoke every time, but there are patterns. And this is one of those things like our business school. It's the same as all business schools. I think there's a real hole in the curriculum that they don't actually teach business development, because when you have an entrepreneur and business schools are trying to cater to kind of the founding CEO team or C-staff team, they teach you finance, they teach you HR, but they don't teach you business development. And so if I'm to look at a startup CEO, what is their most important thing? It's to hire great people, it's to raise money, and it's to do your first few deals. And they don't really equip you on how to do those deals. And so I think that's something that's a hole in the marketplace. There's lots of different constructs of different types of deals, licensing and, kind of in, out, revenue share deals, all sorts of stuff. So there are archetypes that come out, and that's probably a little deeper than we have time to go into. But I do have my rules of negotiation that I can tell you. First rule of negotiation is speak second. Do whatever you can to put your number out last. Once you do that, you're hitting your floor or your ceiling, and you're going to work back from there. And ways demure, and you can put out crazy numbers that allow you to still have that flexibility, but do what you can to do that. The second is you don't get what you don't ask for. Don't be afraid of asking for things. And, my old boss at Zynga used to call it feeling out around the edges. You don't really know where the barrier is if you don't start feeling that out. And don't be afraid of that, because the third rule of negotiation is you can ask for the world. Just do it nicely. People will let you, I like to give this funny hypothetical of applying for a job. I really need a Ferrari company car because, for me, picking up and dropping off the kids takes a long time, and I could be at the office sooner if I could drive 150 miles. That's obviously an outlandish example, but you can ask for things, and that helps you feel out those edges. And then the last thing is and this is the most common way of saying is win-win scenario. I've done deals that have contributed to companies going out of business because they were super aggressive. I've done deals that were so good that they were bad. And I used to say this on panels, there's the best deal and then there's the right deal. The best deal is not necessarily the right deal. And so when you get into a position, like you might say, hey, this isn't economically viable for our company over the long term, but it is going to break us through to the next level. For instance, maybe it's doing a deal with Home Depot or Costco, and they're going to drive our margins, and we can specifically figure out what that timing is, and we're going to box it with a term to that agreement. But because we have that deal, that's going to allow us to get X, Y, and Z right after. And you're making a calculated risk on that. And as long as you're thoughtful about that construct of a deal, I'm going to put parameters around no more than X units. You can be very confident around like what it's going to cost you to get there. You always have to think about the other partner has to make money. Like people, I used to do a bunch of deals in China in the gaming industry. They'd be like, well, do you have to bring like a suitcase of money? I'm like, no, like one, no, ew, I'm never doing that. But two, if you have to, there's a reason why that's happening. The economics aren't good enough for the other partner. And so you should be thinking about, like, is this actually a partnership that we should be doing? Because if you can't have enough of a strong incentive on the other side of the table to lean in, if you sign the paper, it's not worth anything. The partner's not going to be doing the thing like promoting it or driving sales or doing whatever it is. It has to be that quote unquote win-win scenario for both parties. So the right deal isn't necessarily the best deal.
The best deal, yeah. No, it's well said. I mean, but going back to the point you were making between sales and business development, it's a different DNA, right? It's a different approach to problem solving and creative thinking versus sheer execution and thick skin to be able to say, hey, I have my quota, I'm going to make it happen. So from a startup standpoint, and that's the world that we at Iron Pillar live in, should BD, it's a twofold question. One, should BD be part of something that an entrepreneur is thinking about very early, even during the MVP stage, and as they're trying to figure out the product market fit, et cetera? From a stage from a timing standpoint, that's one question. The other is really the DNA, right? Is this a function that requires a specialist to come in from the outside, somebody who's been there, done that, or should the startup be thinking about getting somebody from within, at least initially, because he or she will have much deeper expertise, perhaps on the product side, and have grown from within the company? Do you have any strong thinking?
So it's a great way to put it, because I would argue that all great startups that are blazing new trails, you're solving a customer like friction point or pain point by doing the thing, or you're doing something that's an order of magnitude better than an existing solution that's out there. You're effectively creating a new widget. And therefore you are, as a startup, in business development land. You're not like, there's not many startups that are going, hey, we're going to go build this thing because it's exactly the same as this huge incumbent and think we're going to win. No, you're going to build something that's solving a customer problem that they're not addressing, or is an order of magnitude better than the existing solution. And so from that standpoint, you have a new widget. And so the startup itself needs to be thinking in this business development framework. Do I recommend hiring a person like me? No. Like that's what is typically falling on the CEO's shoulders, could be the COO. But I think that mindset of the C staff of the founder suite needs to really be thinking in this way. What's our market? How are we viewing it? What's the TAM? How do we do a top-down approach, a bottom-up approach? What customer problems are we solving with our product? How are we, going about getting to those customers? Like what's our marketing? Like all those things that I think about when I'm starting something new in my group. That's what the startup team has to be focused on. You can get advisors and kind of smart VCs who've seen this before, such as yourself, or you can get someone like me on the board to bounce ideas off of. That's what I would do, but pulling in an expensive headcount Into the founding team, I think that falls typically on the CEO's shoulders.
Got it. And look, I think one of the so this is more the enterprise centric startup question rather than more the consumer centric. So but it may be applicable there as well. But on the enterprise side, let's say, small startup that's doing maybe $1 million, 2, 3, 4 million a year wants to tie up with a larger player, whether it's around distribution, around bundling. A bunch of our companies, for example, go after enterprise sort of digital transformation, and these are massive, 9-figure-a-year contracts with the Accentures and those kind of SIs of the world. And so often, what startups end up feeling is, look, we need to latch on to those guys because that's going to give us that step function uptick. But often the partners are saying, hey, you pull us into an account first. Let's start the relationship from that standpoint before we bring you into our bundled solution. So I'm wondering if, as you think about partnerships, especially a smaller company dealing with a much larger incumbent, what is the process, or how should one be thinking about the process of getting the bigger player extremely excited about the value proposition or the product or the widget that the smaller startup has, because there's still this sort of David Goliath dynamic that's going on, and how do you actually make it that win-win, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, there's two, I think, general schools of thought on this. One is what I call the Danger Will Robinson school of thought. Oh my God, if we go into the big company, they're just going to copy everything we have, and they're just going to build it, and yada yada. I guess that's the glass half empty school of thought. The other is hey, there's a reason why startups exist and will continue to exist. Big companies get slow, heavy, and cannot innovate, and that I have never seen change. Like, it is not. You can talk about intrapreneurial efforts and things like that, but there is always a room for startups to bring new innovation to a space that big companies just can't do. So that's more of the glass half full kind of view, and I think that's what I ascribe to. So I look at it as, when you think about going to a big company and trying to get a test done, the real idea is, I always come back to product. It's like I'm A/B testing a product. I'm coming out with a new product, say like a new virtual item in a game, and I'm going to release it and test it to a small cohort. That small cohort is, say, that large company salesperson who is intrigued but needs to see data and proof that this matters. And so that's what you're effectively doing. We often call it in a crawl, walk, run, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, V1, V0, V1, V2. You can call it whatever you want, but it's like, how do I create this test where I get real data and not some false negative or false positive? False negative is what you're worried about. A real test where I'm not asking a lot from my partner. I'm asking them to just basically ride shotgun, and we're going to show our stuff, and we're going to show how great it is. Because that, then when you have that data or that feedback from the customer, the improvement of sales, whatever it is, that metric is, then you can allow that to scale. And the analogy is very similar to a seed investor, to a Series A, to a Series B. What's the proof of concept? How do I go out and get my initial market data? How do I scale? Those are the fun types of funds that you're getting at those initial stages. What's my proof of concept with my large corporate partner? How do I get data with the first customer? Then how do I scale? You're doing that exact same process, just with a customer. My worry and thing that I would stay away from is, I have seen a number of friends' startups hit the wall because they have single party counterparty risk. So they have latched on and said, look, if I don't get this thing done with Salesforce, and this is not the company that my friends had failed startups with, but I'm just giving it as an example, we have nowhere else to go. That's not a place I would want to be as a startup. You want some optionality. So hopefully there's 3, 5, 10 big customers that you can work with. You pick one that seems friendly and seems interested, and you try to get that proof of concept going, or maybe you do 2 or 3. I don't like business models where there's just single party risk.
Yeah, I echo your sentiment there. Quick question on business models. I mean, you alluded to this, whether it's rev share, licensing in, out, et cetera. Is there one that you prefer because it somehow has, it's more tangible, it's more long lasting, or is it basically a bespoke, it's case by case, and so you just have to.
It really depends on the business model of the startup, right? And the situation. And so one of the things we're exploring right now is what's Reddit's place in the world of generative AI and LLM. There is no precedent for this. This is a huge technology change, lots of disruption. Everybody's really kind of like, wow, this is cool, and it's going to happen, and it's going to be big, and the pace is accelerating. I mean, the difference between ChatGPT 1, 2, 3, 4, and the capabilities is astonishing. And so what does the world look like? Reddit has a large training database. And like, how do you price that? Like, what are the things that you look into? And there's this, I would say Microsoft, when we go back and look at their acquisition of GitHub, like in 10 years, they're going to be like, that was a amazing acquisition, because the data set for a coding kind of co-pilot, so to speak, is unbelievable. And they have exclusive access to that, like spot on. But I have to imagine for sure that was not in their investment thesis when they purchased it. I don't have inside information on that or at all. I'm just saying, I would bet a decent amount of money that that was not in their internal deal memo when they did that. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, you bring up the topic du jour, right? This is, and everyone from my mother to our kids are talking about this thing. They may not understand it, but that's what's remarkable about this entire movement, is how darn quickly from November 30th or whenever it was, so 5 months gone to 200 million plus users across, and then the auto GPT, sort of take the if that then this sort of not just query responses, but then taking actions and what comes of it. So any predictions at this point? I mean, we were talking briefly about this before we started recording, but I'd be curious to get your crystal ball gazing a little bit to say, okay, what do you think? Or maybe there are multiple outcomes here. What does it look like?
So I'll leave Reddit aside because I don't want to talk about my company too much in detail. But I think it's very interesting. I have 3 kids as well. They're in grade school, and it's going to be a big part of like learning and education. And it's not something that like a number of schools have outlawed it. It's not going away. It's like saying, hey, you can't have access to your iPhone and iMessage. Like, you actually got to lean in. And that's where I think like things like liberal arts education, structured thinking, learning how to think is probably becoming even more valuable, because you're going to be learning how to use the prompts to make the thing do what you want. The kind of rote stuff of like of just memorization. I look at my kids when they're taking my son taking his algebra course, he gets to use a graphing calculator. And I'm like, oh my God, I had to do it on graph paper. That's so unfair. And he's like, why would you do it on graph paper? It's just like not even comprehend. And I think it's the same thing. We're going to get to a point in 10, 20 years, or even maybe 3 years, where students are going to say, why would you ever write your term paper? Like, why would you do that? You would just put in the prompts, and then you go through it and make sure it's saying what you want to say, but you're high level guiding it, polishing it, and things like that, just like a code pilot might do for a programmer. So I think these are fascinating things. And I think you're going to see probably some behemoths created. OpenAI has an early lead in terms of notoriety right now. Do they become the only? My guess is there's probably a handful that come out of this. But then there's this whole ecosystem that's going to build around. And to go back to the Salesforce analogy, Salesforce created this huge CRM platform, but then there's a whole ecosystem that runs on top of it. I mean, they have this absurdly large Dreamforce conference every year where the whole ecosystem's coming in to work on this. And so my guess, there'll be some juggernauts created, but then these wakes of ecosystems of very profitable and interesting companies that will ride on top of that. How much value add and where do they add value? That's too hard for me to see. I mean, if I knew that, I'd, you know, my own Hawaiian island like Larry Ellison.
Now, I think you'll be building your own Hawaiian island, is my guess, after the dust settles here. But no, it's an interesting point that you bring up is well, twofold. One, the graphing paper analogy, and the fact that, my son, for example, refuses to go for his driver's test. He's like, why the hell do I do that? Everything is going to be self-driving anyway. So why do I
can use Uber? Like,
why do I obsolesce myself and go through that pain? Anyway, that's a separate, Jolly family dinner topic. I digress. But I guess the other question really is around, the just like any other sort of, if you look at social media or you look at search, right? Google was not the first, right? They were probably the 12th or 15th on social media. There was, Friendster and MySpace and others for Facebook. So the point you bring up around OpenAI as having sort of this early lead, the only I guess counter to that argument is just the sheer magnitude of engagement, right? They have in such a short period of time, which the other similar disruptions, at least around consumer-facing sort of platforms, it was not at this level of critical mass this quickly. That's the only thing I'm thinking about. But I do agree with you. I think it'll be a handful. There'll be an entire sort of ecosystem that gets developed. The worry I have personally is, just like any other sophisticated technology tool or platform, it can be a platform for good or for evil. And so it
absolutely will be
in this sort of very ultra democratized way. What do the bad actors or characters do with sort of GPT and equivalent versus, and I don't think regulation and government is the answer, because somebody could be sitting in a basement in some place in Eastern Europe and create mayhem. So there are all sorts of other challenges, which again, I'm guessing other companies will be built to hopefully address those.
Yeah, I mean, I always think those pace of acceleration graphs where they're comparing
Right.
growth of Microsoft and Windows and like Inktomi and the other search engine, remember that name, to Facebook and Twitter and Snap to this. I think that's just the acceleration of technology. And I think it's really dependent on the vertical that you're looking at. It very, very well may be that OpenAI becomes, I don't know, the Friendster or the MySpace, and there's a Facebook that comes and dominates. Don't know. That's too hard to predict, in my opinion. So, but it is clear that this is definitely accelerating. I personally think about this as like similar to the graph paper and the kind of the graphing calculator. Having a chat solution in school, write my term paper. If you think about it for social media and search, how do we know what's human and not? Like when I talk to data scientists, they say the prior generative AI had a thumbprint that you could figure out, like this was from generative AI. They're like, now it's too good. We can't have a thumbprint. And that creates a lot of interesting problems, because sure, if you say, hey, Jolly's just putting some prompts in chat GPT, spitting out an answer, and he copy and pastes that into, I don't know, a YouTube comment section or something on Facebook. That's probably not great. But then what if he does the prompts and then he adjusts it and says, this is what I want to say? That's more like the graphing calculator. And is that bad? Is it good? I don't know. It depends on what it says. That kind of stuff. And I think there's going to be a lot of very interesting regulation and legislation that's going to come out. Like the EU just announced like that the generative AIs have to publish their data sets. Where does their data come from? Like that's what they're working towards. Now, they want to propose legislation. I don't believe that's actually passed, but it's an interesting thing. Like, okay, so you have to say where your model has been trained. That's an interesting.
Fascinating. You know, Kurzweil, I think, was the one who coined the term, right? The pace of innovation is accelerating or something like that. Yeah. And this is just the latest and a phenomenal example of that. And you're right, it's not months and years, right? It's days and weeks when the next rev comes and just blows our mind over and over and over again. So
companies like NVIDIA and all the cloud hosting are very well positioned for this because they're doing, what is it, the pickaxes and shovels.
That's right.
That's right. They're quite happy with that.
That's right. Hey, listen, one final question before we bring this to closure, and this can go on for hours, and maybe it will when I see you next week. But you know, as you look at your career, as you look at, especially from a working with startups or being at companies when they were relatively small, what are the 2 or 3? I mean, I do call them nuggets of wisdom on this podcast. I mean, what are sort of 2 or 3 rules that you live by, or you would encourage entrepreneurs to live by? You know, especially in this sort of constantly changing world. Yeah. How do you keep them grounded?
So a couple of things that I would use to answer that question. One is, remember Jonathan's rules of negotiation. They work not just for when you're representing your company with someone else on the other side of the table, but also in your personal negotiation, like when you're taking a job with a company. Like the same rules apply. So remember those rules of negotiation. Yeah. The second thing I would say is, I personally like to have a love of the thing. I don't love CRM systems, which is why I'm not at Salesforce. I love consumer media. That's why I'm in consumer media. That really helps. If you're really passionate about that, like you'd be passionate about a clean energy startup. That's a really cool thing. You could be passionate about something else. Medical software, it's changing lives, all that kind of stuff. As long as you're passionate about the vertical, and different people have different passions, that really will help you overcome those trials and tribulations that all startups go through, because it's a bumpy ride. Every single startup, no matter how successful, is a bumpy ride. I would say I always trust what I call the rule of 3s. So think about 2 to 3 things that you want to accomplish every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year, for yourself, for your company. I learned this from Mark Pincus and kind of the OKR process, is it really helps crystallize the things that matter, because life, job, your company, there's definitely the 80-20 rule. Spend, 80% of your time on 20% of the stuff, it's an exact number, but there's a bunch of stuff that really doesn't matter that we all spend time on. Focus on the big things, and I think everything else will sort itself out. And then the last thing is sell as soon as you can. Don't wait. That's just I want to pass on to entrepreneurs, and that's an interesting place for a VC who doesn't always like to see their entrepreneurs selling down their positions. But I would say personally, sell everything as soon as you can. I've been bitten on the butt more times than I've made money by holding. Just go get it out, get cash into you for your personally, your family, whatever, kind of household unit you have. It's great to have that security in the bank to take care of your loved ones. So sell early, max.
No, well said. I mean, it's interesting. I went through a similar exercise at my previous employer, and it was a 90-10 rule. So 90% of the time, I think, when we held on thinking that, hey, it's going to be a better outcome downstream, it actually backfired. So you're absolutely right. And at Iron Pillar, we have this, the terminology in the VC industry is DPI, which is distributed, per invested dollar, distributions per invested dollar, rather than just TV PI, which is the total value per investor dollar. So I'm with you on that, and with that, we will bring this phenomenal conversation to closure. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing your thoughts. This was absolutely tremendous. Thanks again.
All right, thank you.